What's going on, everybody? It's Colin here with the Stoned in Time podcast. This is episode 1, so we'll get right into it. I just want to start off with a quote from Stephen Hawking at the 2012 Paralympic Games opening. Ever since the dawn of civilization, people have craved for an understanding of the underlying order of the world. I think that's true to some extent. Everybody wants to know everything about everything. Everybody just feels the need to know, like, what is history? Why does history matter? And what I want to teach you guys. So what is history? Well, history is basically just the reason who we are, what we stand for, and all that, today. Why does it matter? Well, we collectively make history every day of our lives, and we always live through it, through the Obama-Trump presidencies, mass terrorism, school shooting epidemics, and today the coronavirus. Now, some of the things that we're going to be going over in all this is just stuff that I'm fascinated with. Evolution, revolutionary era, ancient Rome, ancient cities, conspiracies, just all the cool stuff about history. So today's topic is the evolution of man and the Neolithic revolution. So the goal here is just to understand the processes and the timeline throughout human evolution. So basically, evolution began with primates who diverged from other mammals around 85 million years ago. Apes, gibbons, and orangutans were the precursors to evolution. It's just nuts. Come from monkeys. The earliest was the homini. They were the early humans and were chimpanzees, pretty much. That separated from the gorillas around 8 million years ago. That's a long time. Generally, it's believed that hominids evolved in Africa and then migrated outward. The 4 main stages of human evolution are as follows. First, we have 4 to 7 million years ago. They were the proto-hominids, such as the Cephalanthropus, the Auroran, and the Ardipithecus. Sure. They were the ones that were bipedal and walked on 2 feet, which gave them huge advantages that we'll go through after. The second stage was around 4 million years ago, and that was the Australopithecus. And then 2.7 million years ago was the Paranthropus. So the 4th stage of evolution was the Homo stage, which here we are. It was between 1.8 and 2.5 million years ago. The Homo habilis, earliest hominid, and they were the ones that used the stone tools, and they coordinated their fine hand movements, which increased their neural connections in their brains, and which basically led to increased brain capacity. Now, this was huge because their brains were like the size of a chimpanzee brain, which is significantly smaller than ours today. And then after that, you get the Homo erectus and the Homo ergaster. They had double the brain size and may have been the first to use and control fire. Wow, that's crazy. What a feat, to be able to use fire. There were different reasons why fire was needed. One, cooking. Everybody needed to cook. And they also used more complex tools. And then after that, we have the Homo heidelbergensis, which was 800,000 years ago. And finally, Homo sapiens came about 200,000 years ago. Now, we started from about 7 million years ago and came to 200,000 years ago. That's insane. It's just mind-blowing. I don't know. And the one that I found interesting here was that humans started using symbolic culture and language around 50,000 years ago. So Homo sapiens are around for 200,000 years, and they just started, making cultures and their own language 50,000 years ago. That's just, you know, that's just crazy. I don't know. After that, there was a completely separate species called the Homo neanderthalensis, and those were Neanderthals, as you might have guessed it. They had a common ancestor with humans about 6,600,000 years ago. That's just nuts. And then they engaged in interbreeding with Homo sapiens around 45,000 to 80,000 years ago. Yeah, that didn't work out. Not at all. They really couldn't mate because they were two completely different beings, Although their brains were larger, they had fewer social and technological capabilities than the Homo sapiens did, which is why they eventually died out. Now, next, there's a bunch of theories about human evolution and why it happened. So we'll start off with the savanna hypothesis, which I think is pretty neat. Humans were forced out of the trees they lived in and onto the expanding savanna, which led them to become bipedal and walk on 2 feet. That one I could see. Yeah, I could totally see that one. It just makes sense, if monkeys are pushed out on trees and they're on the ground, then they'll have to, stand and see further and, move further and stuff. With that, we come to the aridity hypothesis, which was the savanna was expanding because of increasingly arid conditions, resulting in hominid adaptation. So those go hand in hand together. These theories can explain reasons why hominids were pushed to adapt and basically evolved to their changing surroundings. Then we have the turnover pulse hypothesis, which is neat. It's a different one. Extinctions due to environmental conditions hurt specialist species more than the generalist ones. So basically, that means just the generalist species, they spread out and they looked further, whereas the specialist species, they could become more civilized and specialized together and thus have a greater rate of evolution. Now, the generalist species were typically the ones who, just looked for food and, did all this. But the specialists were the ones who stayed together in packs and kind of stayed in one place and used everything around them. Which is pretty neat. Then we come to the Red Queen hypothesis. This one is just weird. I'm not sure if I believe this one, but its species must constantly evolve in order to compete with co-evolving animals around them. I kind of get the point, but animals don't really evolve, that often, so I don't know. Maybe we are changing. After that was the social brain hypothesis, which is improving cognitive capabilities would let humans now influence local groups and control their resources better. This kind of goes with the turnover pulse hypothesis, in the sense that, like, the specialist groups would stay together and, work together, and control their resources better. Then there was the Toba catastrophe, which I haven't really looked into, but it was a near extinction event for early humans around 70,000 years ago. So there were many human adaptations throughout evolution, and there are many reasons for it. The first was bipedalism, which, walking on 2 feet, freedom of hands for labor instead of using them to move. That made it physically less taxing on the body for movement because they wouldn't have to use their arms. Their arms would be free and it would be all on the legs. Longer distance traveling and hunting. Now this one was cool because they could now move further, faster on 2 feet. They had a wider field of vision. They stood up tall so they could just see more across the horizon. Reduction of amount of skin exposed to the sun, which I'll explain a little bit here. So monkeys, they're all fours, and all the sun would be on their back. So it kind of exposed the whole body and not just one area. There were also skeletal changes to the legs, knees, ankles, joints, spinal vertebra, toes, and arms. These all came with bipedalism and took a long time to fully become how they are today. The pelvis became shorter and more rounded with a smaller birth canal. This one is cool because this is the reason why birth is more painful for humans than it is for monkeys. Because monkeys have a bigger birth canal. I just thought that one was cool to put in. So then we move to encephalization, which is big brain time. They had larger brain size. So it started with the Homo habilis and continued on throughout evolution. It allowed for more neural connections after birth. This is why the social learning and languages are possible for humans today. This is why we can remember things and why we can talk and remember words, places, events, ideas, The theory that a focus on eating meat and cooking resulted in larger brain growth. I believe it. Think about it. You have to think about it. If you don't know basically anything and you discover fire and suddenly you're, killing meat and you're cooking it, you got to learn how to cook it, how long to cook it, just a whole bunch of things. So it makes sense, Next, we have the differences between male and females. This one's short. They had reduced sexual dimorphism, which resulted in females being fertile year-round with no signs of fertility, also known as a hidden estrus. Yeah, so, girls can get pregnant basically anytime, versus the primates who had their own, mating time. The males are significantly larger and have more body hair than the females, but they have less body fat. That's just evolution. These changes may be linked to longer-term care of offspring, and there was also an emphasis on vision instead of smell. Now, this is because the humans had to see farther on 2 feet, and the sense of smell wasn't really, it was needed, but it wasn't the most important at the time. They needed to get their vision straight. They needed to see if a lion was about to attack. They needed to see where the oasis was for them to get water. So yeah, the emphasis on vision instead of smell was pretty huge. So yeah, that's basically an overview of evolution. And now we'll jump into the Neolithic Revolution. It's also called the Paleolithic Era or the Stone Age, and it spanned from 2.5 million years ago to 10,000 BC. This is when humans lived in small groups and hunted and gathered resources and supplies for survival. This is where civilization begins. Throughout the civilizations, there were a simple division of labor based on gender. The men hunted and made tools while the women gathered food like nuts, berries, and fruits around the area. It was a simple lifestyle. It worked for them and it worked for everybody, so they all worked together. Their tools were simple and made of stone, wood, and even bone. They have found hand axes and spearheads made of bone. Typically, there was like an elephant bone or, whatever they killed, they would just shave the bone and carve it into whatever the tools they needed. Then we move into the fire controlling. The fire controlling now allowed for cooking. So now they had a source of heat and light. The heat was huge. Pretty cold conditions at nighttime, so the heat would keep them warm and probably increase their lifespan, I would say. Light was significant. The light was used for exploring, and it was also used to scare off predatory animals, such as like lions and, whatever that approached the camp that they were staying at. This is also when humans begin to create art and pottery. This is why we're seeing art and pottery from different civilizations being dug up, such as Göbekli Tepe, which is one of the first civilizations that I haven't talked about yet, and we will get to in the next episode. Yeah, but there's art and pottery now. The art was about their religious gods and who they believed in, and the pottery could be used for water storage, just decoration, anything. So with that said, they started believing in religious and spiritual figures and held rituals and burials. Now, this is huge because our modern day society basically runs on religion, whether you're Buddhist, atheist, Pastafarian, who knows? There's just a ton of things that people believe in nowadays, and this was the start of it right here. The nomadic tribes often moved their settlements when food around them began to run scarce. This was huge because this is what led to civilizations. This was the result of humans spreading out from Africa, like we discussed before, 60,000 years ago into Eurasia, Southeast Asia, and Australia, 40,000 years ago into Europe, and 15,000 years ago into North and South America. So then we get into the shift from hunter-gatherer to agriculture. Now, this is also very important. This was all about the domestication of plants and animals around them. They could now grow crops for themselves and also domesticate animals for their uses, such as milk, meat. Although it was more labor intensive, though, the people saw an increase in population and cultivation, which led for more people to settle rather than continue to be nomadic. This was the shift of when the nomads became civilized and together. There are theories on why people started to settle. The oasis theory suggests that the climate became drier due to depressions in the Atlantic, moving northward, so people started living around oases, since this is where animals came to get their water. This would also allow them to domesticate these animals and plant their seeds along the oasis. That one's pretty believable. Then we get into the hilly flanks hypothesis, and this suggests that agriculture had been around the hilly areas of Taurus and the Zagros Mountains, where the climate was not as dry, and there would be enough animals, food, and water around. Then there was the feasting model hypothesis. Agriculture was driven by displays of power by offering feasts to the local people to exert dominance. This would require large quantities of food and would drive people to work harder to grow crops and cultivate crops. Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this one. I don't know. I don't think they were just giving away food that they grew at the time. I would imagine people were pretty protective of what they grew and the animals that they domesticated. So I don't think they'd be doing this. Then we get into the demographic theories. Increasingly sedentary populations started to outgrow their resources and required more food that could be easily gathered. And then there was the evolutionary intentionality theory, which was agriculture was an evolutionary adaptation for plants and humans, which would lead to full domestication. I don't know. I'll leave that one up to you guys to decide. Let me know which theory you think is true for both that and the evolution. We'll do that. Now, there were effects on society. Increased food production meant denser populations, larger sedentary communities, accumulation of goods and tools, specialized in new forms of labor such as farming and domestication. Larger societies meant different ways of decision making and governmental organization. Now, this is where we get into the beginning of civilization, because all these people couldn't coexist peacefully per se, and they needed to have a governmental figure to take care of them, make sure all their needs were being met. This is why we have rulers, presidents, dictators, all that today. Pretty neat. There were also deep inequalities for women. Men were seen as warriors and the breadwinners of the families, while the status of women would become less important to those tribes. This is also important because this is where women inequalities started and would last until the early 1900s when they were given full rights. That's a long time. Do the math. Then we have social classes were formed based on occupation. Now, this one is where we become for status. Farmers and craftsmen were on the lower end of the pole, while priests and warriors were on the higher end. Now this is where we have social classes like we do today with middle, upper, lower class. The effects on health. These people had poorer nutrition. They also had shorter life expectancies, more labor intensive than the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Diseases moved from animals to humans as a result of domestication. Now, this is when we get into the problems that we have today, such as coronavirus with bats. Interesting. Agriculturalists also had more anemia and vitamin deficiencies, spinal deformations, and dental problems. So yeah, their health was pretty messed up. And then there was the impact on modern life. Advances made in the Neolithic Revolution are what we base our societies and governments on today. There was new forms of specialized labor between not only the humans, but also genders. Trading food and other goods now became a commodity. We no longer are a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. I mean, people hunt and stuff, but we're not like that anymore. And the human population would change from 5 million to 7 billion today. Yes.